So welcome back. Thank you for being here. It was very inspiring and beautiful talks until now. But what can we do? What can we feel when it's Rick Doblin speaking? So this is, we will have our first online intervention now. Rick Doblin is the founder of MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. He did it in the 80s because he wanted to become a psychedelic therapist himself the moment MDMA became illegal. So he tried to create an institutional entity to make it possible again. And 35 years later, MDMA is now in phase 3 study for PTSD. He will tell you everything about this. One thing maybe I would like to mention is that an article on the MAPS blog from 2006 from Andrew Sewell was the inspiration for us in the beginning to create the first student association in Switzerland. So if we are here today, it's also really because of Rick Doblin and his awareness work. So thank you so much. I think I can just leave the floor to Rick. Thank you for being there, Rick. It's a pleasure.
Yes, thank you for having me. Yeah, I apologize. I wish I could be there in person, but that's not possible. So I'm glad the miracle of modern technology makes it so that I can be with you. So it has been now 36 and a half years since I've started MAPS. And just to have a touch point in Switzerland, this is around 40 years ago, almost. This is me and Albert Hofmann. And the reason I'm showing this, I wanted to mention that it was a few years after that Albert came to Esalen for the meetings in 1985 when we were planning how to protect the therapeutic use of MDMA. And a group of us did MDMA together, and it was Dave Nichols, who's a student of Sasha Shulgin, Albert, myself, two women, Debbie Harlow and Elise Agar, who had started Earth Metabolic Design Lab, the nonprofit before MAPS that I started in '84. And so we were all doing MDMA together, and there was this moment where Albert had his eyes closed and he was experiencing what MDMA was doing. And then he opened his eyes and with a smile, he said, "Finally, something I can do with my wife." Because her first experience with MDMA, her first experience with LSD, she didn't particularly like it. So she never did it again. But one of his first thoughts when he experienced MDMA was that finally, something I can do with my wife. I don't think they ever actually did it, but that just is a good sense of what MDMA feels like and how it is different than LSD. So it's now been 36 years of psychedelic science through MAPS, April 8th, 1986. And this was after we actually had won the lawsuit against the DEA. The judge said MDMA should be available as a medicine, illegal for recreational use, but available as a medicine. And the DEA administrator rejected that recommendation and kept criminalizing it. So that's where I had to start MAPS. This is the MAPS logo as interpreted by Alex Gray. And the important thing here is that the hands are first and the psychedelic imagery is in the background. And so what this really emphasizes is that it's about therapy. The psychedelics help the therapy be more effective, but the treatment itself is primarily thought of as psychotherapy. It's not that you give the drug and people automatically get better. It's not like a traditional psychiatric drug. You take it every day on your own. This is only you take a few times under direct supervision of therapists. And again, it's people helping people that will be the primary active ingredient in helping people overcome PTSD and many other things. This is our corporate structure. For most of the time, it was people donated to MAPS. MAPS would invest in our MAPS Public Benefit Corp, which is the for-profit arm. It's our pharmaceutical arm. We've got about 150 people working in the MAPS Public Benefit Corp and around 35 people working in the nonprofit. But people would donate to MAPS and MAPS would invest in the Public Benefit Corp. We now have investors as well. We've raised about $45 to $50 million from investors, and they have a royalty share of once MDMA becomes a medicine. They don't have any ownership, they don't have any control, but they do have a royalty share. So what does the therapy itself look like? It's an alliance between the therapist and participants. The therapeutic alliance is the key factor. This empathic rapport and presence. We support the participant's own healing process, emphasis on preparation and integration and trust in the process. The key point here is that we see ourselves as trying to help people learn how to heal themselves. We're facilitating their own healing process, but they have to do the hard work. The direction of the session sourced from the participants' experiences. It's not like we overlay on top of it. Here's our structure. Here's cognitive behavioral therapy. Here's prolonged exposure. Here's our techniques. Here's our exercises. It's not that. We support what's ever emerging from each person. And it's this inner directed therapeutic approach, this belief that there's this inner healing intelligence, and we support it as it emerges in whatever kind of order that it comes. So it's very supportive in that way. So we did a series of phase 2 studies, including one in Switzerland with Peter Owen and Verena, and others in Israel, Canada, and the United States. This was from 1986 to 2000 is when it took us to just get permission and do the phase 1 study. That's when we started phase 2. Took us 16 years to do all these phase 2 studies to get a sense of what is our dose, what is our treatment. And one of the things that we learned, and it's important to say, is that you have probably heard that in the work in the 50s and 60s with LSD and psilocybin, and in the modern research with psilocybin and LSD over the past 20 plus years, there's been a correlation between the depth of the mystical experience and therapeutic outcome. And we use the same mystical experience questionnaire in MDMA research, and people don't score as high as they do with psilocybin, but they score surprisingly high. 0.6 on all the measures would be considered a full mystical experience. And you can see that on average, people scored above 0.6. You see this 0.60 quite a lot of the time, but there is no correlation. So that's a key distinction between the therapeutic approach with psychedelics, the classic psychedelics like LSD and psilocybin, and MDMA, in that there is no correlation between the depth of the mystical experience and therapeutic outcome, and therefore we're not looking for trying to bring people to a mystical experience. So it took us, as I said, 30 years to have this end of phase 2 meeting, and we were granted breakthrough therapy. Since then, psilocybin has been granted breakthrough therapy twice for Compass, for treatment-resistant depression, for Usona, the nonprofit, for major depressive disorder. And this is our therapeutic approach that was approved for phase 3. Takes about 3.5 months. There are 3 8-hour day-long sessions with 2 therapists, usually male, female, but not always. And we have 12 90-minute non-drug psychotherapy sessions as well. So there's 3 before the first day-long session for preparation, and then there's 3 of these integrative sessions after each therapeutic session. And then there's the 2-month follow-up after the last session. And so people either get randomized to therapy with MDMA or therapy with inactive placebo. And in most cases, people are able to tell the difference, but there's really no good solution to the double-blind problem. And the doses that we give, the first session is 80 milligrams, followed 2 hours later or so by 40 milligrams, half the initial amount. It doesn't make it stronger, but it deepens the experience, makes it take longer. And that's what we really are looking for, is the longer experience we think is better. Then the second and third, there's the option to go up to higher doses, and over 90% of the people do that. So then the second and third are usually 120 milligram followed by 60. So this is our therapeutic method, and it was approved by FDA, but it was also approved by the European Medicines Agency. So this is the phase 3 design that we're using around the world. We did go to the European Medicines Agency after we had FDA approval. They agreed to accept our FDA data. They required us to do one pivotal 70-person phase 3 study because they will take our data from the FDA. Those two studies, our phase 3 studies, are being done in Israel, Canada, and the United States. And the EMA requested that we enroll refugees and migrants. And this was our team that we went to EMA. Big Pharma will take large numbers of other people. These are the sites that we're working on, and we're now, training therapists in these sites and moving forward early next year to move into phase 3 in Europe. So this is the one data that we've published so far in phase 3, our first phase 3 study, published it in Nature Medicine. And we have to do 2 phase 3 studies. The first one that we published was only 90 people, and it was supposed to be 100, but it was because of COVID. And so we negotiated with FDA. They said we could end it with 90. And the second phase 3 study, next week, actually, we think we're going to be gathering the final data point in that study. So we published in Nature Medicine in May 10th, 2021. Science, at the end of each year, comes up with a list of the top 10 scientific breakthroughs of the year. And to our surprise, they said our study was one of the world's top 10 scientific breakthroughs. And I think it was because we're the leading edge of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. So not just because we had such great results, but also because they wanted to announce sort of this whole field of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy moving forward. So of the 90 people, 30 of the 90, their principal trauma occurred during childhood. 84% had childhood trauma. So you can see childhood trauma will contribute to later development of PTSD. Most of the attention in the media goes to veterans, but most of the people in our studies are women with sexual assault or sexual trauma. 2/3 of the people are women, 1/3 are male. And you can see the distribution from the various causes of PTSD here. We try to work with the hardest cases. And so the people had chronic PTSD, severe chronic PTSD, an average of 14 years, with 1/3 had PTSD for over 20 years. We do enroll people that have previously attempted suicide, this positive behavior where you either make preparations, but you don't go through it, or you actually do attempt it and fail. You can see that over 90% have positive ideation, think about suicide. Serious ideation was more than 1/3, and positive behavior was around 1/3. So these are definitely the severe chronic hardest cases. These are the results in a graph. The top is the therapy without MDMA. The bottom is the therapy with MDMA. So you can see actually that the therapy with MDMA is pretty effective, but therapy with MDMA, the therapy without MDMA is pretty effective. Therapy with MDMA is pretty effective. And you can see the distance between the lines grows. Each dot is after the MDMA session. So after the first, after the second, after the third. So there's kind of a cumulative effect as people are getting additional MDMA sessions. And up in the corner, you can see that our statistical significance was 0.0001. Incredible, 1 in 10,000 chance that what we found was random and not due to the actual intervention. We also do measures of depression and functional impairment, and those also go down both with the therapy, but even further with the MDMA. We show that in the control group, therapy without MDMA, 32% no longer have PTSD at the 2-month follow-up, which is pretty incredible. But when you add MDMA, more than twice as many, 2/3 no longer have PTSD. We don't have the 1-year follow-up, but in the phase 2, you can see that it was in the control plus therapy group, 23% in phase 2 no longer had PTSD at the 2-month follow-up. 56% were the group with MDMA, but we do have the 1-year follow-up data, and that was 68% at the 1 year. So what that shows is people keep getting better on their own. The 2-month follow-up is for regulatory agencies. That's the comparison they'll look at. But then the 1-year follow-up is going to be more for insurance companies, natural health insurance. Is it durable? And if so, then we think we can have it paid for. The side effects are all acute here. These are more in the MDMA than in the placebo: muscle tightness, decreased appetite, sweating, feeling cold. These are non-serious, they're transitory, and so they're treatment emergent, and they fade after the MDMA goes by. But we have, in terms of more serious adverse events, they're all more in the placebo group than in the MDMA group. You could see this: suicidal thoughts, cardiovascular problems. We didn't have any in the MDMA group, or abuse potential. But this was the most important point here: serious adverse events that we have to report to the FDA. One woman in the placebo group tried to kill herself twice, and another self-hospitalized with severe suicidal ideation, but no attempt. But none of that happened in the MDMA group. So the MDMA safety profile is really pretty good. This is a very interesting study that was done by the Veterans Administration. This is two different studies superimposed on each other. It's not a direct comparison, but the middle lines, the yellow and the green, are from roughly 900 people. It took them about 6 years to do the study. They're comparing prolonged exposure with cognitive processing therapies, the two main therapies used by the VA to treat PTSD. And so you can see on the left-hand side that their group started with slightly lower CAP scores, the PTSD symptoms. We had the harder cases, and you could see that our line, the red line, therapy plus MDMA, did the best. But in the upper right-hand corner, what's most important is the dropout rates. So roughly half the people in prolonged exposure, 55.8%, in cognitive processing therapy, 46.6%, dropped out of the therapy because it was so difficult for them. But only 6.5% people dropped out of our MDMA therapy. So we start with the harder cases, we keep them in the treatment, and in the end, they're better off. We believe that we will be able to make a cost-effectiveness case. PTSD patients have high stress, they have stress-related illnesses, they go to the emergency room. So we think we will be able to get insurance coverage. And just to say this, that we use our own therapeutic approach, which we call interdirected therapy, but we're saying that, again, MDMA is a tool. And so it's being used with cognitive behavioral conjoint therapy. It's dyads where one member has PTSD and it affects the relationship. Candace Monson developed this when she was at the Boston VA. We did 6 dyads, and the results were better when both get MDMA, both in reduction of PTSD and in strength of the relationship. We're also working with Ann Wagner in Toronto, a protege of Candace, to develop a new approach to show that MDMA can be combined with cognitive processing therapy. At Emory University in Atlanta, we're combining MDMA with prolonged exposure. And Ed Nafoa, who developed prolonged exposure, is working with us in Israel. So again, what we're trying to say to people is that this is a tool. MDMA is a tool. You can use it in different therapeutic approaches. We prefer ours, but we think it can be used in many different ways. We're also going to be starting a group therapy project at the Portland, Oregon VA. This is going to be very important. Personally, I don't think it's going to work as well as individual therapy, but it could be 80% as good, but it could end up being, 40% of the costs. We also are doing a project in Israel. Israelis and Palestinians are using MDMA and ayahuasca together. So Leo Roseman has done an early group taking them to Spain for ayahuasca with pre and post measures, and we're going to be doing something similar with MDMA. We have a bunch of humanitarian projects that we want to work with, particularly with Rabia and others, to bring MDMA where there's lots of trauma, not hardly any money, but also not a lot of therapists or psychiatrists. So we're really going to have to explore group therapy and other approaches with local healers. This is the future of psychedelic treatment centers. This is really more in a city, but this is just to show that the treatment centers are going to be staffed by therapists who are going to be cross-trained with ketamine, psilocybin, MDMA, and you will get customized treatment. And we are going to be having the world's largest psychedelic conference ever, middle of June 2023 in Denver, and we'd like to invite all of you to attend. It should be incredible. And now I look forward to some discussions. But what I really want to emphasize before we do the talks is that the next week is when we are getting the final data point in our second phase 3 study. And it's looking really, really good. We had an interim analysis, so we may have 2 successful phase 3 studies. And if that's the case, we anticipate FDA approval early in 2024.
Hello. Yes. So thank you so much, Rick. Now we have some time for questions.
Yeah.
And so you can just, yeah.
Hi. I'm not sure if you could see me, but I was curious about the 2% versus placebo when the suicidal ideations were happening. Do you think that psychotherapy without the psychedelic assistance would cause some, stirring up the old traumas and then they just felt worse?
Yes, exactly. So, where I pointed out with the Veterans Administration study there that they had 50% dropouts. So therapy without the support of MDMA or potentially ketamine, psilocybin, other things, ayahuasca, LSD, therapy like that, it can be re-traumatizing to people. You have the activation, you don't have the fear reduction. And so there are, just to give you an example, there's over 1 million veterans on disability payments for PTSD. And it costs the Veterans Administration around $17 billion a year just for disability payments. So these are people for whom the traditional therapies didn't work, and now they're disabled with their PTSD. So I do think that therapy without traditional therapy brings emotions up, which are often very difficult for people to handle, and that's why you have this large dropout rate. And I think what we had was, 2 out of the 2%, 2 out of 90. Well, actually, it's much higher because half the people were in the placebo group. So it's about 5% of the people who had therapy without MDMA had very serious adverse events of suicidality that we needed to report to the FDA within a week.
Thank you so much. Do you have any data showing how much better or worse also patients get if they just take MDMA without the 12 accompanying sessions?
No, we have not done that. So again, what we've tried to do is figure out how do we get the best results? How do we maximize therapeutic outcomes? And so, and then also we were very focused on, what do we need to do for the FDA, for the European Medicines Agency, to get this approved around the world. So giving people MDMA without the therapy is not something that we want to do. It's not something we think is necessarily even safe. There's a lot of stories of people that take MDMA at raves in recreational settings, and a lot of them talk about how they learned things and it was helpful for them. But there's also stories of people that had MDMA in non-therapeutic settings, and they end up worse off. Feelings come up, they don't know how to handle them, they try to stuff them down. So I don't think it's necessarily even ethical to do research where you give MDMA, which brings things to the surface, but not have the full therapeutic support. And fundamentally, it's not like ketamine, where, esketamine was approved as a drug for depression without therapy. And so sometimes ketamine clinics will give it to people without any kind of preparation or integration or support during the experience. And the results tend to fade, they're not long-lasting. So, we've not tested that, nor do we think we will.
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. I don't have a question concerning the obvious efficacy, which is fantastic, about the benefits of MDMA in therapy to treat trauma. I have let's perhaps say, a question concerning the political position of this treatment model, because on the one hand, there's very serious evidence to show that it's treating trauma in a fantastic way, but it's not exactly doing anything to help the fact of the trauma occurring. So you have collaborations with like the VA hospital. Well, people are going to get traumatized if they're being shipped off to war. The same as with sexual abuse. That's a function of, horrifyingly patriarchal societies. And I wonder if you see perhaps there being a problem of these kind of therapeutic centers being very much part of, rather than addressing the causes of trauma and function more in a palliative way to treat the trauma after the fact, and then maintaining the fact of the trauma occurring?
No, I don't see it that way. Certainly, you could say the same thing about medicine. So somebody, we've learned how to treat battlefield injuries. So does that make war more likely? I can see how you could try to make that argument that any kind of medical intervention that you give to people on the battlefield, which maybe helps them not die or, helps them have the least amount of physical damage, that makes war likely. I think that really what makes war more likely is the dehumanization of others, the way soldiers are trained not to feel their emotions. And so when we work with people who have trauma from war, let's say, or from sexual abuse, we're helping them manage their emotions. And I think we help them become more sensitized to their emotions, and then they will become more, safer warriors, if you want to say it that way, if they want to stay in the military or if they want to leave. So these are mostly veterans. We haven't done work with active duty soldiers yet. But I think you're pointing to something very important, is that we have a trauma-inducing culture. We have a human species that engages in war more frequently than not. We see that now with what's going on in Ukraine, with all the Syrian refugees as well. That we as a human species have a murderous nature in many different ways. Carl Jung in 1959, a few years before he died, said that we need to understand psychology. We need to understand human nature, because the only real threat to man is man himself. And this is an exact quote. He said, "And we are the source of all coming evil." And so this was, again, Carl Jung. So I do think that we need to move beyond healing the people that are wounded in wars or from sexual abuse to healing the entire culture. And I think that psychedelics can play a role in that, particularly when used in therapeutic contexts or spiritual contexts. But what that really points to is a two-pronged strategy. And I didn't really get this in my talk so far, but the two-pronged strategy, one is psychedelic drug development, try to make these substances into medicines that are covered by insurance, that are available to people who are traumatized. The other is drug policy reform. These drugs should not be illegal at all. The whole drug war is counterproductive. It causes more problems than it solves, and it is against the ability of people to do preventative medicine, you could say, or personal spiritual exploration. And so what our goal is mass mental health. And I think this maybe gets to your point, and a spiritualized humanity, is that we are just patching up people from a damaged society. I don't think that is an apology for the damaged society or makes the damaged society, supports it. But we do need to move beyond just treating the wounded to addressing the core causes. And that, I think, is going to require a shift in human consciousness collectively. And you see it a lot in some of the astronauts that have gone up to space, and they look back on the Earth as one thing, and they see we're all together. It's all one thing. They don't see the borders. They don't see the religions. They don't see the races. But they understand that we're all in this together. And not just humans, but all life on Earth. And so that kind of global spirituality, that sort of essence of the mystical experience, the sense of unity, we need to have millions and billions of people feel that and know that. And so I think that's where your question to me points to, is that I don't think it's bad to be healing people at all. I don't think it reinforces the negative parts of the culture, but we have to go beyond that to really address the core aspects of the culture and human nature. And whether humanity as a species is going to thrive over the next 50 years or even survive is at risk right now. And so that's where I think we really need to medicalize psychedelics and to legalize them and make it so more people can access them with pure drugs, honest drug education, peer support, and treatment on demand for people that have problems.
I have two questions. Maybe one is not so important, is a detailed question concerning the effectiveness of the the therapy. And the other one is maybe a little bit provocative, but also in the same direction for how to make therapy more effective. So the first one, this 120 milligrams, seems to be some kind of a standard doses. But as far as I know, it should be given concerning the body weight, kilogram.
No. So let me ask your first question. Answer your first question first, and then the second. So nobody would say that you should take LSD based on body weight, or psychiatric medicines are not distributed based on body weight. We did our first study, phase 1 dose response safety study, that was done with milligram per kilogram dosing. And there's a wider range of effects that you get when you do it based on body weight. It has to do with absorption. Really what it's about is what crosses the blood-brain barrier. And so what we have seen is that MAPS started out with our therapy projects working with fixed dosing, and we felt that that was more uniform of the subjective effect. But the psilocybin groups at NYU, at Hopkins, they started milligrams per kilogram. And as it has turned out, they fixed dosing as well. So I really don't believe that it's better to do dosing based on body weight.
Okay, thank you for this answer. And that second question is, if therapists would take MDMA also during therapy, would that make them worse or better therapists?
We don't endorse that. Well, first off, I think the situation is that therapists are going to be working with people multiple times a week, we hope. And that's way too much for therapists to be doing MDMA every time that they do it for therapy. I do think that therapists are going to be more effective if they themselves have done MDMA in a therapeutic setting as part of their training in order to become therapists. And I think that the whole point that we're trying to say with patients is that we want to help them learn how to heal themselves, so that they can kind of work to process difficult memories after the MDMA with techniques that they've learned. People, I think therapists and others, can learn how to have MDMA-like feelings to some extent without the MDMA. That's our goal, is to improve our baseline. So I think that therapists should have the opportunity to volunteer to take MDMA as part of their training. It should never be required. It should always be optional. We never really want to have people go forward and be required to take a drug. But I think that therapists can do pretty great work without doing MDMA. And I think the other issue about taking MDMA themselves at the same time is that you might get wrapped up in your own experiences, depending on how many times you've done MDMA before, what it catalyzes. So no, I think that you need to be there for the patients, not there for your own internal dynamics. So I think there's a lot of good reasons why we don't need therapists to do MDMA when they're giving it to their patients. And again, just think, how many times would they be doing it? It would be really debilitating, I think, if they did it that often.
Thank you.
Okay, hello, thank you for your talk. I think we all can imagine that there are many more indications for the use of MDMA in the therapeutical setting, so many more mental disease or couples therapy or whatever. Will there be the possibility 2024 to use it for other indications? And if not, do you think people will go to their doctor, they write down PTSD and then use it for couples therapy anyway?
Well, couples therapy is one of the best uses of MDMA. My wife and I try to do it together every year. And we're now 29 years married. So it's been very, very helpful. However, couples therapy is not a disease. So we're not going to get the FDA to approve, or any regulatory agencies to approve MDMA for couples therapy. The same way we won't get it to be approved for, you want a personal growth or a vision quest or a spiritual experience for psilocybin. You know, these are only tools permitted by regulatory agencies to treat diseases. So that's a big problem. That's also why I think we need drug policy reform and drug legalization. But to your point about off-label prescriptions, as a sponsor, if MAPS is and MAPS Public Benefit Corp have made MDMA into a medicine and hopefully done that then globalized, we cannot knowingly sell for anything other than PTSD. However, prescribers can prescribe for off-label uses, and that's the practice of medicine. And regulatory agencies, not only can they not stop that, but they don't want to stop that. And so then the question is, will insurance companies cover it? So it's not illegal for prescribers to prescribe for something that's not the labeled indication, the PTSD, but it is a big question about whether it will be covered by insurance. And then you also have to start thinking about malpractice. And so for that, what you need is a significant minority of your peers to say it's okay, and then it's not medical malpractice. And so that's where studies that what MAPS will want to do is multiple studies in other indications. And if we get promising results like we've done, Ben Sessa has done an incredible study with people with alcohol use disorder, with treating them with MDMA. And what he learned is that a lot of those people were actually processing trauma, were running away from unprocessed trauma. And under the influence of MDMA, they do their processed trauma, therefore they need less use of alcohol or substance abuse. So that's like an early phase 2 study that's in existence, it's in the published literature. And so if therapists were to say, well, you know, I've got someone who's got alcohol use problems, they could decide whether to prescribe off-label. Again, MAPS cannot knowingly sell off-label. We can't promote off-label uses, but we can educate people about the science that's been done on off-label uses, like Ben's study. And so I think that's going to be the way of the future. But what we really want to do is do phase 3 studies with other indications. Once PTSD is approved, if we can get PTSD approved, then we will continue to do research into other indications, and then that will make it so national health cares and private insurance will cover those other indications as well.
Hi, you were telling us about the study of the group of Palestinians and Israeli
Yes.
with ayahuasca, and you said also that you're planning to do something with MDMA. And I was just wondering if when you're going to do this, when you do these kind of experimentation or trials, is it in link with, like, in Israel and Palestine, do like the politics, you know, like know about it? I was just really interested in what could be the future of you know, things like this, and how politicians would, you know, open to that.
It's a great question. I mean, right now what's happening is that it's illegal, the Israelis and Palestinians doing the ayahuasca and MDMA together. I mean, just because not Israelis and Palestinians doing it together is illegal, but just the use of these drugs is illegal. So these are small groups of people. They're not the hardcore haters on either side, because they're people willing to be in these mixed spaces. And so it's kind of an early seed of something that could blossom and grow. And so it's not politicians themselves, although that could be really another way to expand. There is a church in the United States, an ayahuasca church, the União de Vegetal, that is legal. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And they have a branch of this church outside of Washington, D.C. And there are some people that we know well that are taking various politicians and their staffs to ayahuasca sessions, which, you know, in this context are legal, so that they can do that. So there is that. But I do think that this work with these Israelis and Palestinians is just the very early beginnings of trying to understand, similar to couples therapy, how do cultures that are in clash, in confrontation with each other, how do we help them see each other as humans, to work through just their layers of trauma? And so I think that we will start with the people that are willing to be in these mixed spaces. The more that we can do research and show that it's helpful, if we can show that, then maybe we can bring in more and more people who are more polarized, who are more on the extremes, to see if they can help each other. So, and also politicians, if they're opening. But again, as I said before, I think the long-term goal really has to be mass mental health. There will always be megalomaniacs, sociopaths, people that want to abuse power and, you know, motivate people by fear. We have that right now with Trump, and we have that with Putin, and we have that with Xi in China. We just have a lot of, you know, autocrats who, and so, yeah, we can educate various politicians, but it's the people that give them power, the people that are willing to surrender their power to dictators and things like that. So I think that in the long run, the safety of the human species is going to be in this mass mental health and a spiritualized humanity. And the work with Israelis and Palestinians, we like to joke that we'll start there, and then if that works, we'll come to the United States with the harder cases of Democrats and Republicans. You know, but it's people in conflict all over the place. So this is just an early effort, and Lior has done tremendous work to bring this first group out of the area of conflict to Spain for these ayahuasca sessions, and he's working on writing up the results right now.
Thank you.
We will take the last question. So thank you very much for your time, Rick. Please.
Yeah.
Hi. Hi, Rick. Thank you so much for being physically so far away, but energetically so present. I have a question about integration in your programs. I was just wondering what kind of tools are the people using to help integration? Is it like a holistic approach? Like, do you have like movement therapy, psychotherapy, sound alchemy, I don't know, different things? Or is it like a one-line, approach?
Okay, so the way that we're doing it, again, is in clinical research, and everything has to be the same for everybody, and there has to be one variable. So the variable for us is either, you know, therapy with MDMA or therapy without MDMA. The integration occurs in these 90-minute, these 12, you know, 3 of them for preparation, 3 after each MDMA session for integration. So the integration itself is really just talk therapy through the therapeutic method that we've discussed. And we have 3 of those sessions after the last MDMA session. And then they're over, and then there's about a month where we're doing absolutely nothing, and then they get the 2-month follow-up. And after that, people are free to add whatever they want. You know, they can go to more therapy, or they can do sound healing, as you say, or they can study meditation, or they can do whatever they want. And then we do the 1-year follow-up, and that's really to, as I said, look at the durability of the effect. And we can't say that the 1-year follow-up is due just to the MDMA, because people could have done other things. Over time, I think in clinical practice, the integration work will be more varied, as you're suggesting, that people can do all sorts of tools and techniques to facilitate the integration process. But because of the limitations of doing a clinical study where everything has to be standardized, the integration that we're offering is really only just these 3 90-minute sessions after each MDMA session. Now, if people need more, if they're having trouble processing, we can schedule additional sessions. So it's not that it must be only these 3 integration sessions, but excuse me. But if people do need more, they get more of the same. They don't get more of, oh, now we'll teach you meditation or something like that. But I think in practice, people will experiment and will get a much better idea of all the different ways there are to do the integration work.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you again for being there with us.
My pleasure. And next time, I hope to be there in person.